Hello, everybody, and welcome to the H.O.W. episode with Beth Ferreira, Wharton MBA class 2004. Beth, welcome.
Oh, Elena, thanks so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Would you tell us, how were you when you were a kid?
How was I when I was a kid? Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. What were you like?
So I grew up in an immigrant family. My family is from Portugal, and we were always a little like the odd ones on the block. I was very serious. I took my schoolwork very seriously, even in like first and second grade, but I had a lot of hobbies. I was I did a lot of crafts. I painted a lot when I was growing up. So, my parents' home still has a lot of paintings that I've made. And, I just, for whatever reason, and this is, education was always important to my parents and knew that it was important sort of to change your trajectory. But, I took it sort of to another level. So, almost to the point when I was in high school, my mom's like, I think you need a day off. Like, you can't work like this anymore. So, but anyway, it's like, I was sort of the straight and narrow, getting my friends who were troublemakers out of trouble, or, creating the roadmap in order for them to get out of trouble, or, hide the things that they had done, or all those kinds of things. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't super exciting, but that was sort of who I was, a bookworm. And I, until I was in seventh grade, I had giant, like really thick glasses. So, I was that kid.
Oh, that sounds adorable.
It's adorable now.
Beth, what was driving you as a kid?
It was like there was something like achievement. And then I think there was also a motivation around I wanted to change the circumstances in which I lived. And so I was convinced that if I did everything right, so get the A, be in the advanced classes, whatever it is, that was sort of my ticket out into the professional world, which I really didn't have any sort of concept of what that really was, because no one around me had professional jobs. So it was always like, well, you might want to be a lawyer because, those people protect people, or maybe you want to be in business because those people make a lot of money. Like it was actually no more than that. And so it was actually just putting one foot in front of the other, making, and this is what I tell a lot of my companies today, is you're just making today better than yesterday and tomorrow better than today. And it was like, just figuring that out. And, and it extended to sports. It was like, oh, well, when I first started playing sports, it was like, oh, well, I need that to get into high school and college. Not like I really love the sport. And then it was like over time, it was like, oh, wait, I'm doing the things that I really love. And so this was not something, and this is a little bit of a tangent. I think that there was always this piece of, my parents spoke with an accent and we were a little bit different. I grew up in a very traditional New England town. And there's always a period where there's always times where I was always underestimated. It's like, well, when I got into high school, I was like, oh, I remember overhearing one of my friend's dads, like, oh, I didn't think that Beth was smart. And those kinds of things. And so for me, that wasn't a negative. I didn't take it as a negative. I was like, it almost propelled me more, because I was like, not only, yes, I did this, I'm going to be really good at this. And this was something that continued to drive me like through college. And as you know, as a woman, that sometimes happens, along the way too, of sometimes being underestimated, whatever. And it's actually a blessing. It's actually really a really, really great thing, because it puts you in a place where you can over deliver in an outsized way without even really realizing that that's what you're doing.
Yeah, I hear you. And I agree. Thanks to all those people who underestimated us.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I, and it never felt good, but it was, but I think it's something that is part of the fabric of who you become, because when you look at, and Elena, we were talking about this before, it's like, everything looks like it's up and to the right. But really, our journeys are about how do we bob and weave and correct for the things that are happening. Some things that are in our control and some things that are out of our control. So we don't have control of where we grew up or the opportunities that the early opportunities that we had. But we do have control of creating or putting ourselves in a position to create potential opportunities and thinking about the world in that way versus like, I didn't get this chance to do this, or why won't that company hire me? Or this is my destiny. Why don't they understand that? It's sort of like just part of the journey of where we're going as people and how we're going to think about the world and discovering what we actually want to do. Because I'm not sure that anyone wakes up as a 4-year-old and they're like, oh, I really want to be a derivatives trader. But over time, right, you're like, oh, wait, here are the things that I like. This is the way I want to work. These are the types of people I want to be around. And you're like, wait, this is actually an amazing job for me. So that, but that's over time discovering what you want to do and along those lines.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. Basically, you're saying don't be a victim. And we love tangents here, so by all means.
Just one big tangent, Elena. Just generally in life, so.
Tell me more. What do you mean? No, seriously.
Really? Oh, I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean, it's basically this self-discovery, right? This whole self-discovery piece, right? It's like I come out of school and it's like, I'm supposed to be doing something in business. I don't really know what. This is an undergrad, right? So, I land somewhere that it wasn't structurally sound and needed to find another job. But ultimately I worked 3 years in investment banking, which was amazing. Like I loved it. It was a huge learning experience. And, in retrospect is probably was not my life's work, but it was a springboard to learn a lot of things. And one of them was the last deal I worked on was an ISP in St. Louis, Missouri, called Primary Networks that was raising debt instead of equity. And they sent like the most junior person there to help write the business plan and build the model. And what struck me was that these founders were just so ready to take over the world. Like, we are going to crush things. We're going to make this amazing business. And we are excited and we are dedicated and we're working like against this. And I was like, wait a minute, this is so cool. Like, these are the kinds of people, these are the kinds of companies that I want to work with. And, we were working with good companies before, but they were usually like restructuring. A lot of the management team was kind of eking out to get to retirement. It was just a different energy around the work and what the companies were building. And so that sprung, and I was like, okay, I'm coming back. I came marching back and I was in New York City at the time. I'm like, I'm going to work at a startup. And so I sent I would go home and dial up on Earthlink because, we didn't have internet at our desks at that time at work. And I looked for every startup in New York and talked to a bunch of them, got a few offers. And, these were crazy companies. Like, there was a company called Flues that was online payment, payments because people were afraid to put credit cards on the internet at that time. There was a few others. And then in that process, I found a company called a VC firm called Flatiron Partners, and they were one of the first firms, and they're actually the first firm on the East Coast, one of the first firms focused on investing in the internet. And miraculously, they answered my cold email. And it was like, great, we love you. We don't hire junior people. We'd love to keep in touch. Maybe you can work with one of our portfolio companies. And as I was going through the journey of trying to figure out where I was going to work, I kept in touch with them and basically created reasons for me to talk to them. and eventually convinced them to hire me about 6 or 7 months later. So I had a front row seat to the dot-com boom and the dot-com bust. And that was really where I got to see firsthand many entrepreneurs doing incredible things. And it is a real gift to have a seat where you're hearing people like really like all in on an idea and thinking about sort of how it's going to grow and how they're going to, in the sliver of the world they're going after, like literally change the world. And that was a super exciting time. It was, I felt like I like won the lot. I mean, it was like the best job ever. And, fast forward, the dot-com boom became the dot-com crash. And, a lot of people got displaced. And, I was fortunate to continue to have a job, but obviously the market and the type of work that we were doing dramatically changed. So on that's where the idea to go to Wharton was sprung. So I was sitting in a new place. It was very corporate. I looked around. I figured I probably had a couple years there. There was no women, no one who was promoted without an MBA. And it was a moment of reflection of like thinking about like, what am I actually going to do for the rest of my life? And this was a really great job, but are there opportunities to continue to do it? At the time, the whole venture market, or the people who were doing venture, the whole market collapsed, and about half the people who were doing this were displaced. And I looked around, and this is not a rule, but a lot of the very successful venture investors at the time had deep operating experience. So I was like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go, find my operating experience. And so went to Wharton, which was great. And, met a ton of people and had the space and time to think about what I wanted to do, which I think was probably the most valuable part of it, while you're learning and doing all these other things that are super valuable for the long term. And we could talk about the value of Wharton, but, and what was interesting is as I was coming out and I was convinced that this is what I wanted to do, no one really wanted to hire me. It was like, well, you've always been on the outside. What do you know about being on the inside? And in the early stage world, it was almost like a ding to have the MBA versus like a positive, because they're like, well, now you think you know it all because you just got this like fancy MBA. And that was a big blow. I was like, wait a minute, like here I am. I feel like I have some skills, but no one wants to hire me to do what I want to do. And I was very like focused. I was like, I cannot come in as finance. I cannot come in as FP&A. Not because those are bad jobs. It was because it was off the track. It was not what I wanted to do. And I felt like if I did that, I would be stuck. I wouldn't be able to move to the track that I wanted, or it'd be more difficult. And so, I was very lucky that while I was thinking about the trajectory early in the time that companies were recruiting, I was like, I need a practice interviewing. So I interviewed for a bunch of the consulting firms, and I got a few offers. And I was really fortunate that that I got those offers, and ultimately ended up at one of those firms, which when I was coming out of business school really felt like I was going sideways. Not that the firm was a bad firm, and not because the job was bad, but it was like off the track of what I wanted to do. And it felt like an intermediary step. I'm like, okay, I'm going here to get a different set of experiences to hopefully translate into what I want to do. And it was a blow. It really felt like a blow. And I was like, oh wait, like after Wharton, like this is the reality. And when, fast forward, that experience actually was really formative and gave me a ton of the skills and a ton of the exposure that I needed to make. And could I have gotten to this place now? Maybe, but it made every step of the way much easier and much more, I'd say I was much more equipped to communicate and lead and structure processes. And when I was thrown into things that I didn't know how to do, it was pulling from the experiences I had in management consulting. And it was huge. I mean, it was hugely, hugely valuable. So when I look at that, it was sort of felt like at the time I was going through it, I'm like, ugh, like I'm doing everything wrong, but it actually was the entire springboard for for the rest of my career. So it was amazing. So it gave me actually a much broader set of tools in order to execute on that side, which I'm hugely grateful for. So when you talk about, when we talked earlier about, it doesn't feel like sometimes it's not up and to the right. That definitely was a step to the right, but it was an important step to the right, and it was the foundation for a lot of things that came behind it.
Mm-hmm. Even though you did not know that at a time.
No, I mean, I spent the whole time trying to get out of there. Like, interviewing the whole time, unless I was like super, super jammed on something. And I was there for 3 years. It was a long time. Unless I was like, there were some cases that were just, that didn't lend itself to doing that. But it was a continuous thread. And it was probably the only job that I've ever had that was the case.
And what did you do next?
So how I got out. So I was looking for this operating job, and it was taking a long time. And when you're 3 years in at a management consulting firm, you start to have conversations about career path and becoming partner. And like I went into a panic. I'm like, wait a minute, like this was only supposed to be a short stop. I can't keep going. This is like I gotta figure this out soon. And still interviewing, and I finally got this job. I got this position at a large media company. It was running strategy, and it was a pretty big job. I mean, it was a very big job for the position I had in management consulting. So it was a big jump. But it was another step sideways. It was like, okay, come in and do strategy. And then in a year or so, you can go and take one of our businesses and run that business. And so it was a step to operating at one point, but another interim step. And it was interim step that I didn't fully know how long that interim step would be. And I went to one of my long-term mentors, to say like, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. And actually not even really thinking that he was going to give me like advice. I thought I was thinking more about advice, like how to come into the role and be successful. And he looked at me and he's like, oh my God, Beth, like, I don't think this is right for you. Why don't you rethink it? And I was like, holy moly, that's kind of crazy. And he's like, well, and he's a venture capitalist, and he was looking at a company in Brooklyn, and he was like, why don't you come take a look at this with me? And that was Etsy. And Etsy had, a couple of million of invested capital. It was still really early. Only it had, I think, 10 employees at the time. And this was my moment. This was like, I could come in and be an operator. Now, it actually turned out I was chief adult, but that's another story. But coming in, because it was so early and I was willing to take the risk, I was able to translate my path into something that was a tangible role. And it was an incredible, visionary founder, started the company, product market fit from the beginning. But it was literally when I walked in the door as the 12th employee, there was a few engineers, a couple product people, and literally the rest were crafters, who were doing various functions from community development to marketing. And, the business was doing well for the stage and the time. And so it was the opportunity to write my own story. And so I came in and started to think through like, okay, well, what do we need to do as a company? And so this was the first pass of putting processes in place around all the important components of the company. So whether it was engineering interacting with product, whether it was our marketing strategy, was it how we utilized the assets that we had, like our front page, holiday planning, all of these things that the company that, was only a couple years old had never done before. So, and that's where, pulling from the experiences I had in consulting, watching these larger companies do this over and over again, scaling it down for where we were as a company at the time. And it was a hugely formative moment because you come in and the company, and you'll appreciate this, the company had all read The Perfect Store, which is the story about the rise of eBay, right before I joined. And in one of the chapters is a whole chapters of the blue shirts, and the blue shirts are the evil MBAs that came in and ruined the culture. And so it's like the night before my first day at work, and I'm reading the book, and I was like, get to this page. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to come in that first day, and I am the evil blue shirt. And I mean, I don't look like the evil blue shirt, but that's who I am. And so I had to figure out a way to unwind that perception of me walking in is number one. And then number two is speak the language in which the culture of the company was speaking at the time. And so words like revenue and Q1 were super scary words. And so how do we talk about goals and talk about, financial projections in a way that the culture didn't reject the organ that they just got. So and not a single person had a Microsoft product on their computer, and all of these things. So it was amazing. It was really hard, but when I'm looking back, it forced me to be able to communicate and lead in a way that forced me to be authentic, and also forced me to understand who I was working with. And so, that is something that we should all be doing every day, but it was so acute that it needed to happen, or, I wasn't going to be successful there. That it created the roadmap of how I work and interact with my teams and the people and, the founders that I work with today.
What a courageous move.
Oh,
so you let go.
I make it sound very simple, but literally everyone thought I lost my mind. So I'd say, the guiding light was these are the kinds of companies I wanted to work with. And these are the types of people I wanted to be, linking arms with. That was the guidepost. Now, this was 3 years out of business school. So a lot of our classmates were getting promoted into VP roles and, getting a lot of expansion in what they were doing. And I'm like, and then it looked like Beth has totally lost her marbles. She's going to this early stage craft startup in Brooklyn. And no one, this is a time when no one had heard of Etsy. And most people are like, why would anyone buy anything handmade on Etsy? Don't you need to touch and feel those kinds of things? There's eBay. If anyone's going to sell anything, of course they're going to do it on eBay. And it's a hard decision to make when the conventional wisdom is going in the other direction. And so, but when you look back and if you look at our classmates' careers or other people's careers, these are the defining moments. These are the ones that actually change the trajectory, that have the most impact. And these are the ones when you have to make the decision from within. And that's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah, and you probably left a lot of money on the table, a great career progression.
Yeah, exactly. I'm giant pay cut. I have these options. What does that mean? That doesn't pay the rent. And look, it was a long trajectory. I joined in 2007. The company went public in 2015. It was had some challenges management wise, and then we're able to sort that out. So it took a long time.
I have to say, I understand, but at the same time, wow.
And the thing is you also need people around you who are going to support you. So like the benefit of, I was joking, the benefit of being the first person in my family to go to college, and there's no I already won when I graduated undergrad. Like there was no, there's no additional expectation. So it almost freed me to make those kinds of decisions, because there was no like expectation of like, you need to be a managing director somewhere, or you need to do X, Y, and Z. Like, it was just like, wow, like you've already done it. And then also like who your life partner is. Like you need someone who's going to, because if there's anyone that decision impacts, it's that person, and you need that person to be all in on those kinds of decisions. And I'm married to one of our classmates, and he was always the biggest cheerleader for all of these decisions. So and the repercussions, right? It's like, if you're making half of your salary or less than half of your salary and you're working double the amount, that has an impact on your quality of life. And that was, for many years. And so you have to have the whole infrastructure around you that will support those kinds of decisions.
How did you make that move from Etsy into venture?
Oh my goodness. Well, I first had to stop at a very high flying company called fab.com. I was the COO. We raised $380 million in 18 months, not including debt. We were, the first company in New York City to hit $1 billion. And I forget what time. There was tons of, flashy news about it. When people looked at me and they're like, "Oh my God, you just like won the lottery. Like, this is like the best company like that we've ever seen." And ultimately the company, fast forward, was sold for $15 million in that fourth year. So, we expanded too quickly. We, to international, and we, the unit economics didn't work the same way as the US, because, it turns out that it's not the United States of Europe, it's different countries. And so there was lots of challenges on that. And, and then once the realization that those mistakes had severe impact, we didn't course correct fast enough in order to just double down on the parts of the business that actually worked. And, in the US, we were incredibly efficient, and the business model worked, and we could have just retreated back to that. But for a bunch of reasons, probably because of the investor base, probably because of the ego of the management team, we didn't shift as quickly as we wanted. And so when I left there, I was traumatized. I had built my team. I had almost 600 people in my org, both here and in Europe. And a lot of those people I had recruited out of really amazing positions to say, like, look at me. We're going to link arms, and we're going to build the most amazing thing possible, and we're going to do this together. And when I was in a place where I had a seat in the room, but I wasn't, the ultimate decision maker, and you saw these things happening over and over, I was like, I can't, like, I deeply felt like I let down my team and I failed them. And because of that, like, this is dramatic. All of our lives are ruined. Like, their like careers are going to be, off kilter. And it took a long time for me to get to a place where I had peace with that. And but it took a long time. And that was when I was like, okay, I don't know if I have another one of these in me. I don't know if I can go back to an early stage company. And, what is next for me? And because I had venture experience early in my career, and I knew a lot of people in the tech ecosystem here in New York, I was talking to a bunch of, firms, and, I was interviewing and things like that. And, ultimately, and this is when you think about like where there's bumps in the road, it seemed like, it would be a logical place to go back to go into venture or back to venture. But what happened was there was lots of interest. And so, there was a few firms where I was having, 10, 11, 12 interviews, partner dinners. They're like, this is great. Your background's great. We think we're great. And then ultimately none of them converted. And it was always, the feedback was not very concrete. And it was always like, well, we're not sure about the fit. And you're like, well, if you weren't sure about the fit, you usually don't have 10 interviews with someone. So, there was sort of this place of like, okay, well, why am I not getting one of these positions? And in that process, I got introduced to the team at what's now Endeavor, WME, which is a talent agency. And they had been investing a lot off their balance sheet. And they had a new CFO, and he's like, we need to think differently about how we approach investing. And there was a whole sort of brainstorm around like what we do, how we'd structure it. And ultimately we decided to structure it as an institutional fund where half the capital is from WME, and we'd go out and raise half and we would invest. And I was like, this is great. Like, so, first time manager sort of being thrown into something like this, seemed a little bit odd. But it was great because I could pull from my experiences from my venture time, but I was really building something from scratch. So it itched that, like, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do another one of these companies again, but I was actually building a firm. And that was what was really exciting. So, we created the strategy and we built the entire team, and I was able to have the opportunity to make investments and show what I could do. And that in turn opened more doors down the road. So, so that was what was exciting. And we, like some of the companies that we've invested in, Warby Parker just went public last week. Daily Harvest, Glossier, Masterclass. So, we were in, some of the really great consumer businesses of that period that were starting in that period. So it was really, really, really fun. And then, ultimately, being sort of part in a corporate environment, there was always a question of the longevity of like, could we continue to raise funds under this structure? And, as we were asking that question, a fund that I'd known my whole career. So one of my partners I had met in '99 when I was in venture capital the first time. I'd been a venture partner at FirstMark in 2011 after I left Etsy. And, they were like, oh, we're looking for someone. And so, it sort of felt like a coming home. So it was, very full circle, a firm that I had known forever and had been, part of their operating, went to their CEO summits and things like that for all these years. And it felt like a very easy decision. And so, I got really lucky. So when you think about the bumps in the road of like, oh, well, I thought I was going to work in venture capital in the early, and then there was the dot-com crash, which was outside of my experience. And then, going to Wharton and the management consulting experience, all these bumps. And you're like, oh, wait a minute. Like, if you look, that's kind of looking like a straight line, but it's all up and about. And now I've been there for 4 years, and it's been really great.
What did you do to make peace with that massive failure?
Yeah. So it took a long time, but when I realized that my team was incredibly resilient and super talented, is probably one of the best, most talented teams I've worked with. They all have landed into amazing roles. I think there's like 5 or 6 COOs from that time frame, and they've all had amazing careers. And so I think when I realized that, just like the bumps in the road for me were formative, this was also formative for them. And it also is an experience where, and I just had a woman from that team who we hired. She was 2 years out of school into an operating role. We weren't really sure whether, like, how good she was going to be. And she ended up being phenomenal and accelerated, promoted, whatever. Was just visiting me last night. And so we as a team have been able to stay pretty close. And I think it's because of that experience. When you have such a tumultuous experience and such an intense experience with someone, it sort of accelerates the amount of time that you're spending with them. And so it's been a tremendous resource for me, and a tremendous source of pride that, like, we as a team were able to achieve all of this, and in the extended world, and people know that people who are on that team are really amazing. But also, I hope that I'm giving that team as much as they have given me. And we just had a talk with our junior team at the firm, and I was talking about, when we're talking about building relationships, and I said, when I have people who I've worked with who are now very accomplished and senior, who, when I call, and I don't call very often, they will do everything in their power to call me back that day or very soon after. And I hold myself to the same standard. So if I get a call from someone, and even if they were the most junior person on the customer service team, I'm going to do everything in my power to get back to them and hopefully help them in some way. And they do that for me. So, if I'm looking for information, or I just need to ask a question, they're doing that. And that's the long term. And I feel like that's what we have in our Wharton network, is that, people who we know from school is the same thing. Like, they're going to call us, they're going to do everything in our power to make sure that we're connecting as soon as possible and getting them the answers that they need.
Well, Beth, you were doing all of this and growing as an investor while you were also a partner and a mom. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes. So it's interesting because they always tell you that there's never a good time to have a baby, and that is definitely true. I'll tell you that. I had my first baby when I was at Etsy. I was the first person. Oh, I was a second person actually to have a baby at Etsy, and that was an experience of just trying to fit the time that I was working into a schedule that would work for being a mom. And it's a pretty intense, long schedule. And we have, when it was also a culture where it didn't really start until 10:30 when the engineers showed up to work, and then it was very, very late, which is obviously the opposite of what you want to do when you're a mom. So there was a lot of sort of trying to figure out, like, how to balance that and make that work, and that was pretty challenging. And then I had my second at Fab. I was definitely the first baby there. And what was interesting is that, the CEO was super supportive. I remember being very nervous because it was very early in my tenure, and telling him, and he was like, "Look, Beth, like, you're not the first person to have a baby. You're not the last. Like, this, we'll get through it." But it's been a journey. And I'd say, in a lot of ways, like, COVID has been a blessing. From this perspective, I've been able to spend a lot more time with the kids. Also realizing what is important and what's not important. And as my kids get older, I think there's intersection of time. And so how can I figure out how to be present in the moments that are most important? And so we'll see, as we're, returning to the office and, school is full time, that we can balance that. But so far, I think it's been good.
How do you take care of yourself?
I'm not very good at it. I'm trying to be better. I've creating boundaries. So, I've done something, I've, used to take breakfast meetings regularly and evenings. So now I try to balance that. I just will not do one or the other in certain weeks, so that there's time for me to work out or think or, catch up on things. And I think that's the biggest trick is because we're always on, or at least that, but we're always on the bottom of the list. And so if you never get to that bottom of the list, then you're not taking care of yourself. But I also do things like I try to walk every morning, and I deliberately do it as a walk because it gives me this moment. It's sort of, I'm not very good at meditating, but it gives me this like meditative moment of like thinking through things that are not like things I need to do at work or things that the kids need to do or things that all these other things, and making time for friends, because I think there's a whole period of time I just wasn't doing that. Anything that I was doing was work related or kid related. And, now it's like, okay, well, how do we make space? And it doesn't need to be a whole lot of space, but something that's for you, investing in the long term, because these are people that you're going to want around for, for the rest of your life. And so you need to be able to invest in those things and make that a priority. And that's been really helpful too. And then just weighing heavily is like, how do I launch my boys in a way that is going to be additive to the world? And so there's a lot of that. Probably when you think about the most important thing right now is that. And so making sure that they have the values and the confidence, and it's really hard to be a kid right now. And also in many of us raising our kids in environments that are completely different than the environments that we grew up in. And so how do we, instill those values and that drive and just feeling good about yourself, as they become teenagers and launch as adults.
Can you complete the sentence? To me, Wharton is the place blank.
I say Wharton is community. And it was community when I was there in a different way than it is now. And so, and I think that actually has expanded. So it was an amazing experience, had amazing professors, and was able to explore things that I wouldn't have been able to explore if I didn't go, and, made incredible friendships that, have been, lasted and will continue to last. That have been super useful, both from a personal perspective and a professional perspective. But it's interesting to me that how the Wharton experience has actually expanded since I've graduated. So I'm the Directors Council of the Baker Retailing Institute, which has been super useful from a networking perspective as well as a content perspective. Like Peter Capelli spoke to us like a month ago, and it was like took me back to being at Wharton, and it was like one of my favorite professors when we were there. And talking about all these things that, when we were sitting in our Wharton seats or, our MBA seats, we're like, oh, that's like, we'll figure that out. That's all soft stuff. And you're like, that's actually all the hard stuff. Like, that's the hardest of the hard stuff. And so it was so cool to have him come and speak to us.
Thank you. Thank you. It was an incredible time. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, Elena, it was so nice to be here. Thank you so much for putting this together and for doing all of these interviews. They've been really great.